Let's begin with the police. If you're black, you know them as the guys who pull you over. If you're white, you know them as the guys that give lap dances at the bachelorette parties. For 3 weeks, since the killing of George Floyd, millions of people around the country have been calling for the police to be reined in. And after weeks of local leaders responding to the protests, today the president himself carefully shuffled down the ramp into the fray. Now, Trump's orders today were a little confusing because he signed an executive order that would make modest changes. For instance, it would introduce a database that would track police misconduct. But then there's also a new thing that would encourage police departments not to use chokeholds, saying that the chokeholds should not be used unless an officer felt like his life was in danger, which means the thing can be used, but it can't be used, but it can be used. And also when Trump came out to make these remarks, it just felt like his heart wasn't in it.
Americans believe we must support the brave men and women in blue who police our streets and keep us safe. Americans know the truth. Without police, there is chaos. Without law, there is anarchy. And without safety, there is catastrophe. Americans want law and order. They demand law and order. They may not say it. They may not be talking about it, but that's what they want. Some of them don't even know that's what they want, but that's what they want. We will have reform without undermining our many great and extremely talented law enforcement officers. President Obama and Vice President Biden never even tried to fix this during their 8-year period.
You know, Donald Trump is always constantly downplaying the number of bad cops. But I mean, if bad cops was a minor problem, you wouldn't have huge protests in every city. You'd just be able to point at the bad cop and be like, hey, Gary, cut that shit out. So Trump signed an executive order that's supposed to cut down on police violence. But he spent the whole time praising the police. Yeah, the only paper Trump has signed with less enthusiasm were his first 2 marriage certificates. And Trump's executive order clearly doesn't have much teeth, but some places are taking steps that really could make a difference. New York has just disbanded a 600-member undercover unit with a long history of abuse. And San Francisco and Albuquerque are now saying that soon, when some residents call 911, they won't get the police at all. Instead, calls for situations involving drug overdoses, the homeless, and people in mental distress will be answered by an unarmed professional who is trained in those fields. And I mean, I think we can all agree that this is long overdue in America. Police in America do too much. So if you can avoid bringing armed police to these situations in the first place, that should be the goal. Because wherever a gun is present, it means that there's a chance the gun is going to go off. Right? If there's a gun in a club and a fight breaks out, there's a chance that a gun is going to go off in the club. If kids are playing and there's a gun around, there's a chance that that gun is going to go off around the kids. If there's a couple fighting and there's a gun around, there's a chance that that gun is going to go off. Having a gun gives every tense situation the potential to end in death. I mean, think of the last time you played Monopoly. Now imagine that there was a gun there. Yeah, it was going to turn into a Tarantino movie. That's what would happen. And I know this seems like a radical idea to some people, you know? Some of you are like, what do you mean you're not going to send the cops? What do you mean? But if you think about it, it's the same thing we did with Ghostbusters over 30 years ago. Yeah, think about it. They used to send cops out when the ghost showed up. And then at some point they realized the cops were not the right people to deal with the ghost issue. So they created the Ghostbusters. They didn't have guns. They had ghost vacuum cleaners. It worked way better, and it was also funnier. In fact, maybe more people would get on board with this idea if we just made up a cool name for the social workers that we send out. You know, who are you going to call? Systemic Societal Issue Busters!